Okay, next we have, this is general business, but we will take public comment on this. This is sponsored by Councilor Katz. Approval of a resolution declaring Tiverton as a Second Amendment sanctuary town. I'd like Justin to go ahead and introduce the topic. And as we move to public comment, I would like to give speaking priority to the four folks who signed up. And all we ask, certainly don't need your address, just your name and your connection to Tiverton, if any. If you don't have a connection to Tiverton, that's okay. But Tiverton residents or those with interest in Tiverton will be given speaking priority, unless you signed up already. Mr. Katz.
This is a resolution that's been going around from various town councils approving it and sending it as they do to each other. When I received it for my work over the past few years, I've read more legislation than is probably healthy for one person to read. And I will say I'm not a fan of legislation that simply expresses an opinion. To me, the most important actions we can take are to support the Second Amendment as a town, or to hire a police chief who respects them, which we've done, and to hire a solicitor who supports them, which we've done. But when I started hearing from constituents that Tiverton should sign on to this resolution, I took a second look, and in reviewing what the resolution does, it doesn't merely express an opinion or say we would like a particular piece of legislation. I'd say it actually helps to set policy in a way that affirms our respect for civil rights without making our town the Wild West. So the resolution does this in two ways. First, it affirms that our police department will be cognizant and respectful of the Second Amendment rights while enforcing the law. And second, it says that if the state and federal governments attempt to impose laws that lead to so much confiscation of firearms that we would have to increase our capacity to store them, then we're not going to spend local dollars for that purpose. At the same time, and I think this is probably the larger reason people support it, it does send a reminder to the General Assembly and the governor that many people in Rhode Island do not agree with the turn that laws have taken and see them as moving closer and closer to confiscation and a loss of due process rights. Personally, I would say I've seen this in the red flag law and in a firearms transportation law that I think this is the second or third year it's been in the General Assembly, which severely limits when you can transport your weapons. And with that message in mind, I think it's important to say that my view is that the Bill of Rights means what it says, and that these rights shall be infringed, and this is a small way in which the town can affirm that foundational principle for our country.
Okay, and then the actual document is approximately 3 pages, but most of the document are recitals or preambulatory language. The actual resolution would, as Mr. Katz said, really do two things. One is to affirm our support of our police department to exercise sound discretion considering the Second Amendment, and then the second part, which is I think a little more concrete, would be that the Tiverton Town Council will not appropriate capital funds for storage of weapons storage facilities on any bill that's unconstitutional. So for this to take effect, there would have to be a finding or I guess a legal opinion, which we would adopt if we adopted it, of unconstitutionality. So I think the word sanctuary can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but I want to be, and we're going to have a discussion about that, but I just want to be very clear what this proposed resolution actually does. It does two and only two things. One is affirming our support for the discretion of the police department considering the Second Amendment, and two, saying that this body would not appropriate capital funds to store weapons in connection with an unconstitutional law. Is that a fair summary? Okay. With that, I'm going to treat this as a public hearing. We're moving pretty well on the schedule. If we go more than 45 minutes, I'll probably have to start to kind of cut down on debate and try not to repeat prior comments. Before I open it up, does anybody from the council want to jump in? Of course, we'll be able to talk further as well.
I would just like the lawyer's opinion on this, and is this okay for us to do? Does this trump any state laws or federal laws, or I'm just asking? Because we can't do that.
You wouldn't have the jurisdiction to do that anyway.
Right, so we can't do that.
It's a resolution.
So that's all it is.
And we've seen other towns, I guess we just acknowledged one tonight, was it Foster, that has done something like this? Okay. I feel like I've seen another one or two, but I might be wrong.
We have
Okay, I'm going to open up with the floor. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Perry?
Yeah, I was going to ask what the police chief's input is on this. Does he have anything pro or con on this?
He's coming.
We're going to have you sit closer to the...
Yeah, sure, tonight's your night.
Good evening again. So I think, and I've spoken to my colleagues, the police chiefs in the other communities where this has passed, just to make it clear for the record, and I'm sure the members of the coalition will make it clear too, as the solicitor just said, this is a resolution only. It does not impact the operations or the enforcement of laws by your police department. We're still going to, we use discretion every day in everything that we do. We're not going to change anything that we do until the laws that are enacted by our state or the federal government change, and then we will change with them. Your police department does not determine constitutionality or even unconstitutionality. We enforce the laws as they are written and passed by our criminal justice system.
So let me ask, why do this then? It's just, I think it's a valid question. What is our purpose for doing this?
Well, as I said, for the larger purpose I think people want to see this done is the message it sends. And I think it sends that in a way that still has some practical implications. There's discretion, which, you have to decide between multiple variables, and if the town council has issued a statement on something, setting up a sort of policy, that does affect discretion, I would hope. And also it does offer the protection as, say, the General Assembly considers a legislation to restrict when you can transport firearms. They'll look at the number of towns that have said, we are not going to build storage facilities for these firearms, and take that into consideration, where we are not going to expend our own funds to build storage facilities. So,
If I may, I hesitate to weigh in, but I am concerned with the way this is drafted and leaves, in my view, quite a bit of ambiguity as to what, for example, the police department is expected to do or not. And I don't know how supportive that is of the police department, because I think the chief, in a very polite way, said, with all due respect,
We're going to do what we have to.
the law is the law, and we're enforcing the law. You can read this many different ways, and different sections read differently. On the one hand, it's very careful to say that, everybody respects the law. We're not going to try to violate the law. On the other hand, there's a little bit of a tone in there that if we disagree with, for example, a law that may get passed in the state, then somehow this discretion allows us to not enforce it.
Right.
Certainly people are getting that impression, and I've heard that feedback quite a bit. And I think that puts the police department in a very difficult position. And I'm not sure that's a wise thing to do.
Now,
And the same for me. I took an oath to uphold the laws. Not the laws only that you like or not, enforce the laws that you don't like. I am supposed to uphold the law that is the law. And this frankly creates a little bit of ambiguity, in my opinion. And I just want to express that concern.
Now, if we confiscate these guns, suppose he confiscates the guns, he has to store them somewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
So even if we say to you, we're not going to give you money to store them, you've got to do something with them. By law, you have to do something with them.
With all due respect, I'll send you the bill.
Right. That's what I expect. Right. That's what I wanted you to say, because what else would you do?
Right.
Scrap iron.
And I will also say, just for the record, and again, there's a process here. And my job, as you all know, I also took an oath. It's to enforce the laws. But under our charter, under 902, there's also non-interference. That makes it very specific for members of the council, the administrator, and politicians to dictate and tell the police department what to do.
Right.
So, I mean, from that perspective, I understand the people that are here tonight to express their opinions, which that, as a police officer, it's my job to enforce that they have the ability to do that. But when it comes to laws that would go against existing ordinances, resolutions that go against existing laws, from my perspective, and I thank the administrator for kind of pointing this out, we're going to do our job,
Right.
resolution or not.
Mr. President,
So what's at stake?
I did not draft this, so I'm not speaking from, the standpoint of pride of authorship or anything like that. But I disagree with the administrator respectfully. I don't think there's any ambiguity here. It certainly doesn't impose any ambiguity in terms of the way that the police are going to execute their responsibilities or their responsibilities. You just heard how the police are going to execute their responsibilities. This doesn't change that.
So why have it?
I guess,
That's a question for the council to
That's the question. Why have it if it doesn't change anything?
yeah, Donna, and then I have a follow-up.
All right. To answer Counselor DiMederos, I think it's sending a message to upstate and our legislators and senators that don't seem to be listening to us on many different issues, that we're not going to put up with them infringing on the Second Amendment. I also believe that it's saying that if they do want to confiscate, that we are not going to use funds to store it and use taxpayer money to store it. We don't want to take part in any part of something being passed that takes guns away from people and makes us use taxpayers' money to store the guns. It's just sending a message that they need to stop with the laws that infringe on the Second Amendment, and that's something that they can or cannot do. They choose to do that, and they can choose not to do it. It's very clear that there shouldn't be any infringement on the Second Amendment, but yet over and over again they try to do it by a little at a time, by 1,000, knife pricks or whatever, until finally you're going, how did we get from here to there, where now we got to turn our guns in? It happens a little at a time. It doesn't happen all at once. And after a while, that's when you notice that you have lost the Second Amendment. And usually, it's the first thing they do when they want to take over is they take your guns and you're using rocks. So it's just, that's all it
Every country, Venezuela, Germany.
I'm sorry, we're going to keep the order, we're going to try. So,
Can I just speak to, mainly to the administrator's point? Having a thoroughly developed political philosophy, I have no trouble creating a little tension in the law. I mean, until we start ordering our police to stand at the border, holding back state police, I mean, this is how democracy is supposed to work. They overreach, we push back a little, things get uncomfortable, and something gets resolved. I think that's an entirely appropriate way to move forward.
okay, so what I'd like to do, I want to make sure that, since I think 4 or 5 of us, I have a comment. I want to make sure that Nancy and Tricia, if they want to say something now, I'm going to turn it over to the public. I just want to comment on this idea of discretion is, I mean, if you look at, let's say, marijuana, right? I mean, is that like legal now in Massachusetts for recreational, and it's legal in Rhode Island for medicine? Is that, I think that's right? Yes. There's not a single person in the room that wouldn't admit that it's a violation of federal law. So it's a little more complicated than just to say we all take oaths and we follow every law that's out there, and there's a sort of a practical, I think a couple of minutes ago on the agenda, you were hearing a consensus that we're hoping that our zoning official, who is also one of our law enforcement officers in the town, uses discretion as you figure out how to allocate scarce time and resources. And I think that's kind of the spirit of how you look at these when you're trying to express a policy interest. So that's just a comment that I'm hoping we kind of remember, that there's a lot of gray and ambiguity and enforcement. So did you want to, I want to make sure that the other two councils had a comment.
Mr.
We'll
President?
come back to.
Just a
Sure.
point of order. I'd just like to clarify, if anybody got the impression that I didn't support the zoning official doing his job in the way that he's supposed to, I'd like to clarify that, because I don't relate that discussion, while I was sympathetic to Mr. Roderick's situation, to anything having to do with the zoning official having discretion as to which zoning, which parts of the zoning code he would enforce or would not enforce. I'd just like to clarify that.
No, I just want to say I agree with Donna, and I agree with Justin, and I think there has been a creep. I don't think this does anything to change what the law currently is, constitutionally or within the state of Rhode Island, and it certainly doesn't do anything to change the town's ability to enforce the law as it's currently written. I do think that there has been some pressure in terms of this confiscation, that the issue came up, well, how are we going to store them? And I agree with Donna, this is like an overreach. Well, I don't know, I guess that's your problem. You'll have to build a storage facility, and I don't think the taxpayer should have to do that.
Okay, Christine van Dhoni is first in line.
Hi.
Just let us know your.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Please. Thank you.
My name's Christine van Dhoni, and I'm a Tiverton resident, and I'm a volunteer for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and I'm just going to make a few points. As Chief Jones stated, law enforcement, with resolutions such as these, law enforcement do not get to pick and choose what laws to enforce. They must enforce laws that have been enacted. Municipalities do not have the authority to regulate firearms in Rhode Island due to preemption laws. That's the Rhode Island General Laws, Section 114758. Resolutions such as these accomplish nothing. They are disrespectful to survivors of gun violence and are out of step with the way the majority of Rhode Islanders feel about common sense gun safety reform. It seems to me that this resolution does not address a specific issue to do with current or proposed gun laws, and rather it feels like a group of people serving on a town council are displeased with the direction the state is going with regards to gun legislation and knows that they have a majority for such a resolution, so they're going for it. All this does is create a distraction to the priority gun bills that the governor and the attorney general have put forth this session. Again, common sense gun safety reform that does not infringe on Second Amendment rights and that a majority of Rhode Islanders agree with. Thanks.
Linda Finn, please.
Hi, my name is Linda Finn. I'm not a Tiverton resident. I'm a resident of Middletown, but I'm the executive director of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. Thank you for taking time to listen to me. I just want to clarify, I have some comments that I was going to make, but I just want to clarify something to begin with, is that none of the laws that are being proposed right now in the General Assembly that the Attorney General, the governor, and the state senators and representatives are proposing would confiscate any weapons from anybody. I think that has to be made extremely clear, that there's not a single law that's being proposed right now to confiscate weapons. And so I think that is something that needs to be made very clear to everybody. And certainly if weapons were taken in a situation where there's a domestic violence situation, or in relation to the law that was passed last year, the Extreme Risk Protection Order, which removes weapons from individuals who are either suicidal or homicidal, they can be stored in the town, but they can also be stored at federally licensed firearms dealers. So it's not that the idea that the town would all of a sudden have this big influx of weapons, I think is mistaken. And I am here because we are Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. We have many thousands of members around the state. We have 123 members that live in Tiverton. And so I'm here pretty much representing them, and my comments I think are shared by them as well. One of the things I would also like to point out is over the past few years, your school committee has signed resolutions in support of one of the bills that has been up for several years now. Sorry, this microphone's really. And I can pass those around if that's okay. Right now, Rhode Island is one of only 5 states that generally allows people with concealed carry permits to carry on school property without anybody knowing who they are or why they're on the school property. So for example, the school administrator, school principal does not know if a teacher is carrying a gun, a parent's carrying a gun in a teacher conference, a parent may be carrying a gun on a football field. We're an outlier in that. There are states, rural states, that do allow people to carry guns on school property, but they have extra training. They are known by the administration. They're known by the law enforcement. So if the law enforcement were to come to a school shooting situation, they would know who that shooter is or who the person was protecting the students. But in Rhode Island, we don't have that situation. And so that's something that we've been advocating for changing since 2013. Your school committee has voted on and supported resolutions to support that law for the last 3 years, and it hasn't passed the General Assembly. And I think it's also really, really important. I sent you an email earlier today, and I'm sure you got a lot of emails. But none of the laws that are on the books in Rhode Island right now, nor any of the laws that are being proposed, violate the Second Amendment. And I think it's really important that that is made very clear as well. And I can pass these around too, if you don't mind. I sent this in an email, but I'll send it to you so you can look at it as well. And just recently, the Federal Court of Appeals in Boston had a challenge to their assault weapon ban that they established in 1994. And just back in April, just last month, it was unanimously held that the law is constitutionally permitted, so that you can make restrictions on banning certain types of weapons. You can make restrictions on banning high-capacity magazines, and you can make restrictions about having guns on school property. So to say that the laws are not constitutional and that this city council, town council will decide whether they're constitutional or not, I think it does put undue pressure on law enforcement to have a town council deciding that they're determining whether or not a law is constitutional or not. And really, in our country, the process is, if you think something's unconstitutional, you go to court and you take the parties to court, and then you let the courts decide. That's how our country is run. And I think it's really important to also understand that gun laws are not made to harm gun owners. They're made to protect the public from gun violence and from gun accidents and from murder and from suicide. We have laws in the books that protect. They protect our community. We have laws to make sure that if somebody commits domestic violence and they've been convicted of that we don't allow them to have weapons. We don't allow them to have firearms, and that protects the women and the children and their families. We passed a law last year, the Extreme Risk Protection Order. That was passed after the Heartland shooter. It was realized that he bought his guns lawfully, and his family knew that he had issues and that he'd made threats, but there was no law on the books to actually remove the weapons from him, even though he was a danger to others. And obviously he was a danger to others in killing 17 students last year. So I think to say that gun laws are only being proposed or voted on to harm lawful gun owners, I think is a misconception. And I think that, there's laws being proposed for safe storage. We know that suicides are prevented in states that have strong safe storage laws. And so Rhode Island does not have a mandatory storage law. So that's a law that's on the books. It's being proposed. It's not a gun grabbing law. It's a law to protect young people who have access to their parents' firearms. They know where the keys are. They know where but we need to do things to make sure that we can keep them from them. So if they're going to be a harm to themselves. So I think it's and I think in my email to you, I said, it's one thing to say that you oppose legislation. So if you want to cite the assault weapons ban and you say as a policy, we just don't support that policy and we're not going to support it, I think that's one thing. And I know the town of Gloucester After their meeting, the town administrator is working with some of the residents in the town to change the resolution, to change the language, so it doesn't have that discretion language in there. It just says, from what I understand, I haven't seen the final draft, that they're saying, well, we oppose that legislation, and that's fine. I mean, that's what town councils and city, school committees do all the time. They either support legislation or they don't support it. But to say that you're going to give discretion or take discretion, I think is a really dangerous thing, and I think that's what we have opposition to.
Might be past 3 minutes.
Sorry, I didn't know there was a time limit. I'm not from the town, so okay. Well, I appreciate you letting me speak longer than that. I'm sorry. If I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Did you have were you wrapping up?
I was wrapping up. So anyway, I just think that my point being is that a resolution is one thing. To say you don't support legislation, I think the language that's in this resolution, it's ambiguous. I think it's confusing for law enforcement, and I think that I just think that if you're going to pass a resolution, and obviously if there's members that support, they don't support the laws that are being proposed, that's great. Put that in the resolution. But I think to take out the discretion wording, I think is very important. Thank you for your time.
Maureen Moreau, still here?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for having this public forum. I'm going to echo a little bit about what Christine and Linda said. I sent all of you an email, and I hope it was distributed. I also wrote to Chief Jones, hoping that he would be present tonight, because I see him as a leader and a reasonable person, and I'm glad he's here. I have to say, when I learned about this resolution a few days ago, I was dismayed. I think the intent of it is to sow discord in our town, and I don't think this is a time when we need that. We just came through a pretty muddy budget process. We have a lot of things to celebrate in this town, and I think this is just dividing. Town councils cannot pick and choose the laws that they will enforce. We are a country of laws, and the town must abide by the U.S. Constitution, the rules and regulations of the state of Rhode Island, and the state Constitution. If you take any issue and look at it generically, what would you think? Let's just put aside gun legislation. What would you think if a town, either in the past or going forward, just decided we're going to cherry pick a law that's on the books, that's been upheld by the Constitution, as these laws have been, and Linda Finn just outlined that, and said we're just going to give the police discretion? That's the part of this resolution that just stopped me in my tracks. Like how you would give discretion. And I understand, Mr. Katz, I think what you're doing is you're trying to shake things up. And democracy is a messy business. I think we all know that. We've seen it at the federal level, the state level, and now here we are at the town level. I want to just answer or just respond to what Councilor Cook said a few minutes ago, that there's a legislative creep, that we need to push back. I'm trying to think of other words that she used. There's a way of doing that. Myself and other members of the group that I'm with are up at the State House often. We write to our reps and our senators. I write to Jack Reed. I write to Sheldon Whitehouse. This is democracy in action. It's citizens using their representative government. It's not pulling this kind of stunt. It's not dividing a town on a Second Amendment issue. So I just want to say, loud and clear, gun control is constitutional. So it is constitutional, and I really would request that people do not speak out. It's been upheld, as Linda said, recently with the Massachusetts assault weapon ban and high-capacity magazine, referring to a Supreme Court decision. So we have to stop this. This is just, as a citizen of this town, if this passes tonight, and I hope every one of you thinks very carefully about your vote, it will be a disgrace that the town of Tiverton is saying we're going to give police discretion on a law or a set of laws, because you have to worry about what's going to happen in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so David Formanek, please.
Hi, good evening. I'm David Formanek. I live in North Court in Tiverton. And I perceive that these are dangerous times for Americans. And this resolution, it seems to me, is intended to deliberately to stir up more division and anger within our community. And as I look around this room and read Facebook posts, it has clearly been successful. In these times, some organizations have found it serves their purposes to stir up fear between Americans. That fear is counterfactual. Violent crime has fallen by close to 2/3 since the 1990s. American exceptionalism describes our 243 years as a nation under the rule of law. In other countries, people have sometimes come to power who proceed to ignore laws, leading to totalitarian dictatorship, the loss of freedom by the populations. We require of American leaders that they obey laws and not flout them, even while selectively quoting parts of judicial decisions. The nullification crisis of 1828, when slaveholding states, whose slave owners the Second Amendment was intended to protect against insurrection, led directly to the Civil War. Nullification, even on the state and local level, has never been upheld by the courts. The way to change laws is to hold elections. Decisions such as this one are not to be made by fewer than a handful of local officials, but by voting. This is how it is done in America. This resolution, it seems to me, is a grave danger to our political existence. In other countries in which division and hatred are stoked, civil war inevitably follows. Civil war is not flags, banners, and glory. Civil wars are fought in neighborhoods, between neighborhoods, as we saw in former Yugoslavia, in Lebanon, in Syria. There are no rules in civil warfare, only the triumph of uncontrollable hatred. Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill said, "All politics is local." This is one occasion on which we must step back from a path that can lead only to unrestricted violence. We all have a duty to ensure domestic tranquility, as the United States Constitution says, or we will see us crumble from within and devoured by its enemies without. This resolution intentionally makes Tiverton an outlaw town in this state and damages civil society. I request that it be withdrawn from consideration. I do not believe Town Council has the authority to speak for me or others before we have gone to the polls about it. Thank you very much.
So I want to let you go next.
Yeah, they've actually said everything I wanted to say.
And then it's an open floor, although I don't know how many intend to speak. I want to make sure if there's speakers from the other side that they haven't, make sure they have the chance to be heard. But Mr. McLaughlin, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, pretty much everybody here knows who I am, Bill McLaughlin. This is pretty much a token response, making us a sanctuary city. It's great, and it sends a message in a way. If this council wanted to do something meaningful for the gun owners here to help them preserve their rights, you would put the sponsors of this legislation's names, email addresses, and phone numbers on the town website. Their committee members' emails, phone numbers on the town website. Because I'm going to tell everybody in this room, I've been lobbying for over 30 years for the Rhode Island Motorcycle Association up in Providence. And when they start getting 5,000 and 6,000 emails and phone calls a week about a subject, they'll sit up and listen. The town council going, yeah, we're a sanctuary city. They're going to laugh and go, that's just Tiverton. Your personal response is the only thing that's going to protect your rights, not what the town does here tonight.
How you doing? I'm Dan Bedandi. I'm a gun rights advocate here for the state of Rhode Island, a resident of the state of Rhode Island. Thank you, ma'am, for your patriotism. God bless you. Everybody's talking about laws today. Laws, laws, laws. We took a sworn oath. I took an oath myself. So he took an oath. You all took an oath. All right. Now you say you took an oath on the law. No, you took an oath on the Constitution. The law of the land is the Constitution, not what the governor says. If anything, if everybody knows anything about civics, that's why, it should be mandatory in school. Civics clearly says, purely, any law that's repugnant to the Constitution is automatically null and void and shall not be infringed. The Rhode Island State Constitution is the only constitution that mimics the Second Amendment. The people's right to keep and bear arms, not the militia. The militia are the people anyway, defined by James Madison. And just in case this man's article he throws up here that says the militia is only for the military. No, it's the people, so says James Madison and the Founding Fathers. Now, the law of the land is the Constitution we all took a sworn oath to defend and uphold. If I'm correct, please, if I'm wrong, sorry, please correct me, because that's the law of the land. And the law of the land, it designates we the people to do, in other words, we elected officials out there to do the job we want you to do, uphold the Constitution. Now, if it comes to a time, clearly states that our officials do not do their job, it then becomes designated to the we the people to make sure that's done. And we want to uphold the Constitution, and we respect the law here in Rhode Island. We got a great state police unit, local town police officers, great. They do their jobs. That's why we have the second lowest crime murder rates in the country, considering with firearms, because they do their job. And we have many great law-abiding citizens here that do our jobs. Now, Mrs. Finn said the legislation at the State House doesn't call for confiscation. Well, guess what? If the semi-automatic assault weapons ban gets pushed and the high-capacity magazines, all of us own those weapons. Now we're going to become, do we turn them in or become criminals if this thing passes? You know what I mean? And now we become criminals, and therefore it would force police to enact unconstitutionally to enforce these laws to confiscate these weapons, and therefore where this resolution falls in, that, it says, hey, you know what? You can't enforce an unconstitutional law. I mean, gun control is failing miserably all over the country. Mrs. Finn says they have thousands of supporters. They don't. I got tons of videos to prove it. At the State House, okay, we have thousands to one outnumbering them every single time. Every town hall, we outnumber them. They don't have they have to bring people from Connecticut, Mass to support them, because all of Rhode Island, and the real polls show, most of Rhode Island, Democrat, Republican, all support the Second Amendment. And it's not about political parties, it's about the Constitution and the preservation. The very sacred thing. Now look at Venezuela, what's going on there. They gave up their gun rights. Hundreds of millions of people in the 1900s died because they thought their government was going to keep them safe. And I know people say, well, it never happened here. Well, the Germans said the same thing. The Cubans said the same thing. Polish said the same thing. And guess what happened? Hundreds of millions of people died by the hands of their own government. Now, we're not going to say, God forbid anything would ever happen like that here, but we're all asking as a town here is just to respect the Constitution. That's the law of the land. And anything that takes away firearms, that shall not be infringed. Can somebody define that? Okay, shall not be infringed. It doesn't say, well, except for this weapon and that weapon. And yes, back then they had high-capacity magazines, or basically the Gatling guns and everything else. Forms of those guns, rapid-fire guns, back in the 1700s. So people can't say it was designated to muskets. No, it wasn't. It was the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. Is plain and simple, clear as day. That you don't need to go to Harvard to interpret that. It's clear as day. We all learned that at least when I went to civics class, you know what I mean? So we're just asking the town here just to support the Constitution. And, because we the people here, we want to be free people. We want to live our lives, respect the law, have a great community, but we do not want to be in those numbers from the 1900s where hundreds of millions of people died because of gun control. Look at Chicago. Just this weekend alone, I think it was almost 140 people died. And they say, they got the strictest and best gun control laws in the country. Now Chicago's looking to Providence for help, because they can't figure out why are these people dying. 140 people almost died just this weekend because law-abiding citizens could not defend themselves against criminals who do not follow laws. So, I'm not going to say I bore you all the stats. The stats are clear as day. But, just thank you all for hearing me. And, basically, I just ask you to vote for accordance to this resolution. And before I go, if people think a resolution does mean nothing, well, you know what? If you need to know your history, because the resolution created the Bill of Rights. The resolution created the Constitution. That's what a resolution is. And it means very much to a lot of people, and it created to the greatest document on the planet is the Constitution. And thank you. God bless.
Hi, Adam Raposa. I live in Tiverton with my wife and daughter. The reason for my support for the Second Amendment movement is largely because our government isn't going to tell me how to protect my family and friends and neighbors. I'm not going to sit back and have a government that I currently do not trust dictate how my rights are exercised and how my family and I need to protect ourselves from any threat. Whether it's a break-in, hijacking, attempt to abduct, or do us harm. Some may believe this is paranoia, but if the time comes when an invading force grows the courage to launch an attack on an unarmed nation, I don't want to be hiding in my house waiting for the front lines to break down. If we ever find ourselves as a nation back in our heels, we need to do what we've done for hundreds of years, shoot back with lots of guns and lots of bullets. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Just a little background. My name is Mike Burke. I am the head of the Tiverton Democrats and a resident of Tiverton. Little background, I grew up in Pennsylvania as a hunter. Not a very good hunter. Didn't get too many animals, but got some. And I also grew up in Pennsylvania as a member, at that time, of the National Rifle Association. So I have some experience and knowledge of guns rights, of using those appropriately for appropriate purposes. Also, as a member of the school committee, and I believe Denise may have been on at the same time. Well, we were always on at the same time. We had a case before us of a student who had been identified as having made threats to other students. And we had a huge discussion. I won't tell you what the outcome of it was, but part of my involvement in that discussion was making sure the folks understood that even though this young person had made threats, and significant threats, and may have had access to firearms, we brought his parents in. And I asked, where's your guns? The father described how the guns were locked in appropriate locking cabinets within the house. Where's the ammunition? The father described how that was locked separately in a different building where his son did not know where it was, in appropriate locked cabinets. So, again, I can't disclose the outcome of that, but I have a good understanding of what safe and sound gun ownership is and should be. I say that also saying that I think this resolution is simply political gamesmanship. And Mr. Katz alluded to it in the beginning when he spoke about his own personal political agenda and philosophy. This goes well outside of any platform that any member of this council ran on, regardless of which side you were on. I do not remember any discussions in the election process of the Second Amendment, of gun rights and the like. So I see no mandate to anybody on this council to take up this resolution. And certainly, although Councilor Cook would like to suggest that you're speaking on behalf of all of the citizens of Tiverton in your positions on gun legislation, you're not. There are I don't have the facts before me, but I appreciate Mrs. Finn and the other women's comments about the facts. And there are plenty of people in Tiverton who support the common sense legislation that was described before. It's political gamesmanship because none of you wear judicial robes. You don't get to choose what's constitutional and what's not. And as the chief said, he doesn't either, nor do his officers. It's political gamesmanship because you cannot tie the hands through a resolution of future councils. So this is simply expressing what I assume is going to be a 4-3 vote on this. I could be wrong. And you cannot circumvent the process for making ordinances, the laws of the town. So if you really felt strongly about not using dollars for capital construction for this purpose, I would urge you, do an ordinance. Would I oppose it? Absolutely. But that's the proper way to do it. Finally, if you're so inclined to focus on supporting the Constitution, then I hope in future meetings you put forth resolutions supporting some of the other articles of the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech and religion. So, for example, some people would believe that the town should not hold the Christmas parades and the holiday tree lighting out here because it supports one religion over another, one set of religions over another. I don't hear or see anything related to that. Another would be Article 13, or Amendment 13. Anybody know what that one is? I won't put you on the spot.
Slavery, isn't it?
Slavery.
Yeah, slavery.
Slavery and involuntary servitude. I don't see anybody putting forth resolutions to take positions on that when we know that human trafficking and sex trafficking, especially of minors, is one of the biggest, most horrendous issues facing our society today. And here in Rhode Island, too. So please put aside the political gamesmanship, and hopefully it won't be the 4-3 vote that I assume.
I won't hold to strictly. I'm just hoping maybe 15 minutes or so more of debate. Let me know if that's wildly out of line, if others want to speak, but just...
How you doing? Anthony Daniels, Rhode Island resident. I'm not going to stand up here for 10 minutes. Just look at the amount of yellow shirts. That should clear what's going on. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody's dressed properly. And just look around at the room. Thank you.
Can people... Can folks describe more specifically their relationship to Tiverton? That's pretty important with a resolution of this nature. Now, Mrs. Finn represents 130 members of the Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence. I'm not sure what the last few gentlemen represent for Tiverton. And that's important.
Yeah, definitely if we run out of time, Tiverton residents will have priority. So see, as you're lining up there, if you're a Tiverton resident, feel free to come up to the front.
Victoria Neville, Connecticut Street. When I came in here, I didn't know what was going on with this. I have not seen any articles about it. Are we taking guns away from people? I don't understand why there is such an uproar. We're just trying. If they break the law, we take their guns. We have to store their guns. This is another thing of Justin Katz trying to divide this town. They're not taking your guns. Who think?
That's what the bill says.
No, it doesn't. It's not taking your guns. And you're talking about maybe. You're talking about maybe they might do this and maybe they might do that. We're not talking about maybes. We need to follow the law. If somebody needs their gun taken away because of mental illness or a crime or abuse or whatever, that's what needs to be done.
Good evening. My name's Jeffrey Gross. I am a Tiverton resident. I live on Stafford Road. I'm also the communications officer for the Federated Sportsmen's Clubs of Rhode Island. I'm a military veteran and I'm an NRA member. So, here's the facts. The U.S. has an identical constitution to our little state's constitution. The governor, the AG, and most of the liberal state house, Senate and House are looking to violate that Constitution. If people supposedly in Tiverton support gun control, Where are they? I drove 6 hours tonight from Maine, fought 2.5 hours of Boston traffic, because this issue is that important tonight. So, that being said, I noticed nobody addressed any current SCOTUS court cases coming up. In June, approximately June 28th, a decision that will affect our red flag law in Rhode Island will be decided. It involves a veteran that has PTSD. Second, there is another case, and they had it in private conference last week to decide if they're going to hear it, and that's Rogers versus Gruel. It is a concealed carry case. They will decide if they choose to hear it, which we should know within a week, whether or not you have the constitutional right to carry concealed, and more so, carry openly without a permit. I'm hearing a lot of distorted facts tonight, and that's troublesome, because distorted facts only confuse the situation in general. The Constitution trumps everything. Our little state says we have the right to bear arms. That's it, in a nutshell. There's a concern, and my sympathy goes out for the chief being caught up in this on both sides. He's got to remain neutral. But for the record, there are numerous police chiefs and sheriffs out west that are refusing to enforce the assault weapons ban because they acknowledge it's unconstitutional. And for the record, as for this resolution before the town, recently it went before the town of West Greenwich, and it is up for hearing in Coventry. The West Greenwich police chief and the previous Coventry police chief are members of my gun club, and they support that. And one other thing that came up in the Heller decision, Justice Scalia specifically made it unconstitutional to lock your guns up and have gun locks. So keep that in mind. And also, for the record, 1790, the Native Americans of Block Island were restricted on gun ownership. They could not own firearms because of possibility of an uprising out there. So this gun control issue is not new to us. Thank you and have a good evening.
Tim Connick, 15 Salisbury Street, Tiverton, Rhode Island. I didn't come here to speak, I just came to show my support. All the people coming from other towns that decided to come up here and speak compelled me to get up here. I just have a couple of questions. One, do criminals give a crap what laws you make? No, because they're criminals. I don't care what laws they make, the only laws they make are going to affect me, a law-abiding citizen. You're going to make me a criminal. So I came here to put my support behind this resolution, which, as I see it, truly does nothing. All it does is send a message to the State House, enough is enough. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Robert Forts. I live on Shove Street in Tiverton. I'm a 20-year retired military police sergeant of the U.S. Army and a veteran of the war in Iraq. I know there's a lot of emotion on both sides. We've heard it all. I support the resolution because I know it sends a message. It has no force of law. But the current semi-automatic weapons that I own, if they break or wear out, if a law is passed banning them, I won't be able to replace it because I know that's the tool that I need properly to defend myself and my family. Evil exists in this world. I've seen it. I've fought it. I'm tired of being myself and fellow gun owners being blamed for the actions of a few madmen. We're not to blame. None of my legally purchased and stored firearms have ever hurt anybody. They will not hurt anybody unless someone decides to try and hurt me or my family. So I appreciate this resolution being put forward. I hope you pass it. I understand if it doesn't, but I thank you for your time and attention in this matter.
Good evening. Michael Ferrera from Connecticut Street, and I'm here in support of this resolution, and I'm hoping that you are too. But I want to talk about the firearms community within this town. You know, we do have 2 gun ranges here. We have 2 gun stores within our town. We have hundreds of acres of hunting property, state-owned, town-owned. So at any given time, there are people in and out of this town with firearms. Not a single issue. Tiverton's also one of the highest issuers of concealed carry permits. On closing, the other day I participated in a fundraiser for the Tiverton Fire Department, which is a clays and clams fundraiser. Firearms were included with that. We had to break clay pigeons. You know, I congratulate the Tiverton Fire Department for putting on such an event. Thank you.
James DuBois, 14 Wood Avenue, Tiverton, Rhode Island. I wasn't going to speak here tonight, but this woman said there's nobody here from Tiverton. Well, they brought a speaker from Middletown, and she's took up most of the time before anybody got a chance to speak. I believe that you should pass this resolution because they're messing with our rights. And if they start with the Second Amendment, who knows where they go next.
My name is Caroline Connick. I have lived here in Tiverton for the past 20 years. I am also an alumni of all the Tiverton schools. I just wanted to say I didn't come out here to speak either. I came just to show my support as well. I learned how to shoot when I was 12 years old, and I joined the NRA at that same age. I'm a lawful and responsible gun owner myself, and I am not going to hurt anyone. I'm not a danger to anyone, and it's not fair to treat lawful and responsible gun owners this way. And I think something else I need to address, someone had mentioned suicide rates. I've been through a few suicides of loved ones, people in my life, and they used bridges, ropes. Guns aren't the problem, mental health is. So, thank you.
President, council members, my name is Michael Dennett. I'm a Tiverton resident for the past few years. I absolutely love living in this little town. As for the CCW you talked about and concealed carry, those people are the most outstanding citizens and law-abiding people that live in our great nation, for the simple fact that they have to go through such scrutiny and hoops just to get that carry permit. And as for the laws, I've read the bill that they've been trying to pass from Rhode Island. It's disturbing to me that they are trying to pass laws for magazine capacity and the semi-automatics. How do they plan, the locking, storing of firearms, how do they plan on enforcing these laws? They're going to come kick in my door and search my house and see how I store my weapons? They're going to come in and take these things for granted? Where are my rights under these rules? And I believe that we do need to send a message. We need to send a message to everyone in America that we need to stand strong and stand together, because if we don't, things are going to fall apart. I love this country, and I know everybody in here does, no matter what side you're on. God bless America. We need to stand strong and send a message to the rest of this nation to say we will not go away in the dark. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Gary Garofalo. I live here on Ford Farm Road. Been a resident of Tiverton since about 2004. My wife Joyce is here attending with me. As you can see, I am not the enemy to anybody here, all right? I'm a local business person. We're pretty respected in this community. I do not have any disagreement with a lot of stuff you ladies are saying. You probably have been involved with being victims or had victims in your world. I'm here to tell you that's not happening on my block or my house, okay? All this yellow stuff here, it doesn't mean a lot other than you don't have to say anything, guys. You really don't. The tone, the undertone, we're not paranoid, we're vigilant. I'm an NRA instructor, I'm a chief range safety officer, all right? I train a lot. We're not here to be paranoid, we're not here to harm anyone. the town of Tiverton has a beautiful club here, Tiverton Ride and Gun. I think last check it's like 1,400 members.
No,
Do you,
it's 1860.
awesome. When I got in, it was 11. So my point is, there's been stuff on Facebook, I don't know how accurate it is, but there's something like 300 million guns in this country and 12 trillion rounds of ammunition. If there was a problem, I assure you, just the yellow shirts in this room would be the problem. All right? So we have to get some type of understanding. Yes, these ladies need to be respected and hear them. I agree with the gentleman who said this is going to mean nothing if you guys vote. It isn't going to mean anything. That gentleman has to uphold the laws that we all approve as society. It is just a statement. All right? My friend Mike, I asked him, I said, what's his Second Amendment thing about? Foster, Gloucester. I didn't know. It just meant, hey, they're making a public statement, hey, we're respecting the Second Amendment. Doesn't mean we're going to start shooting at him if he comes to my house. I'm going to put my hands up and say, Chief, what's the problem? And he may have to tell me bad news, and I'm going to comply. All right? But there's a lot of overzealousness on both parts. I've often heard someone that negotiates very well say sometimes you got to go extreme one way, they go extreme the other way, and you meet in a happy medium. Maybe you folks are used to that. I've never been on a town council. I don't care to be. No, I'm being honest with you. I don't have the time, the patience, energy. But I just ask everyone to just please respect these ladies, but please respect those of us that really care about this country. We've all seen, I have a lot of black friends, and I remind them, that's how slavery started, guys. Down south, the first thing they did is take the guns away. Germany, Venezuela, all that stuff's been highlighted. It's history. You cannot defy history. You just can't. I know you think we're in a peaceful world. That gentleman's seen stuff I don't ever want to see, all right? And a lot of the detectives and police have. They keep the cap on all this crap, all right? We are responsible for ourselves. We're not the police, but we want to be responsible for our own home, our own families, and our friends, all right? Thank you for letting me rant on. Thank you.
Cameron Ramsey, Tiverton, Rhode Island. I don't mind ambiguity when it comes to yard signs or roller derbies, but when we're talking about does a domestic violence abuser get to keep his gun in Tiverton compared to in Little Compton, that's a different cause. Please do the right thing. This is silly. Thank you.
Any other last call for public comments?
Last call, Richard.
I'll be quick, as I usually.
We're doing okay on schedule.
I wish to thank the council for bringing this subject up, this matter up. I agree with Donna, Councilwoman Cook. It's about how we respect our Constitution. It is the most powerful law in the nation and in our state. In our state, it has a very simple statement about guns, and it goes, "We the people, the people's right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon." That means gun law 1 is unconstitutional. They do not. It is completely inconsistent to have a statement that you shall not infringe, and then you come up with gun laws that infringe. And this is where I wish these ladies. Why? Others have done, and
they shouldn't have been done either.
Wait a second, guys. What's the problem?
All right, folks.
Well, they're talking to us. They should be
talking.
Okay, and other speakers have done that well. You cannot demand an answer from a member of the audience, but if you'd like to speak to the audience.
And I'm not demanding. I wish they would, instead of coming up with gun laws, gun control laws, I wish they would change the Constitution. If our Constitution, the Rhode Island Constitution, stated that the people's right to keep and bear arms shall be governed by law. Well, then, terrific. You know, come up with gun control laws. But it doesn't say that. So where they need to start, or how they need to solve this problem is to change the Constitution. And now you are acting in the proper manner to get things changed to where you want. And this is what I think the resolution says to our state governor and state house, that we want you to follow the proper procedures. And the proper procedures is to change the Constitution. You know, if you want to be really good about gun control, you can be like Illinois. You can just say the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall be denied. And look how well that does. So, thank you for this opportunity to talk.
May I have another quick comment?
Sounds like everybody that's wanted to be heard has been heard. Just anybody that has first time, and then we'll let you have a brief.
Hi, I'm Carl Dumas, 48 years in Tiverton. When I was 17 years old, talk to these guys, the U.S. government gave me a gun, sent me to a faraway land to protect all you guys. And now, with a stroke of a pen, you want to make me a criminal. And that kind of hurts me. That's all I can say.
So I just wanted to say a couple of things, because one of the disadvantages of going early is that I just feel like I need to correct things, including what this gentleman just said. He served our country, and I thank him for that. But we're not trying to make him a criminal. I'm not sure where that comes from. We're not trying to take his gun away. So the point is, and actually Mr. Rahm made it too, proper procedures have to be followed. We do have a U.S. Constitution. We have state laws. We have a state constitution. And the whole process of a democracy is legislation is introduced. And I think it was you, Mr. Katz, early in the evening said something about legislation as an opinion, or it starts as an opinion. Did you say that?
No, I said I disagree with legislation that is purely
opinion. Most pieces of legislation start as an opinion. It might be, everyone should take the responsibility to have health insurance. That might be an opinion that then becomes law, as an example. So that is the process that has to be followed. It's unfortunate, or actually it's unfortunate for folks that don't want to follow it, but it's fortunate for us as the United States citizens. We have a format. We have the ability to go to your representative government, make changes to the law. They can go up through the appeals court. And in this case, these laws have been found to be constitutional. And then in response to the gentleman who was talking about, people concealed carry are the greatest people on earth, I do invite you all, I don't know if Linda Finn passed this out. These are examples of where concealed carry weapons holders, guns got in the wrong hands on the grounds of schools across the country. These are verifiable news stories. So folks are law-abiding citizens with guns until something happens. That guy in Las Vegas, I think he had a pretty relatively clean record as a law-abiding citizen until he wasn't. And we all know what that story brought about. So thank you again. I really do encourage you to all think very carefully about your vote tonight. And this is a meaningless resolution, and it's going to be a blotch on the town of Tiverton.
I just wanted to give the opportunity for one member of the public that is in support of the resolution, if they'd like to have a second chance to speak, since I allowed Ms. Monroe to speak. Any objection to closing the public comment? Okay, the floor is open on the council. I guess I'll give Mr. Katz the first word, then councilors that wish to speak in opposition, if they'd like priority after Mr. Katz.
Mainly I just want to make something abstract kind of concrete. There are two ways a law-abiding gun owner becomes a criminal. they become a criminal, or the law changes out from under them. One statute that I mentioned earlier, it's H5022, states, new law, no person shall carry a rifle or shotgun in any vehicle or conveyance on or about the person, whether visible or concealed. There are exceptions. And then, every person violating the provisions of this subsection shall, upon conviction, be punished for imprisonment for not less than 1 year and up to 10. So what this means is that this becomes law, and you carry a rifle in your truck, which you maybe habitually do for display, for self-protection, whatever it may be, you will now be a criminal, and if you did carry the gun, they'll take it away, and you'll be put in prison. The judge will have no option, 1 full year. This is how good people become criminals when the law changes. So that's the one concrete point I wanted to make.
Mr. President, just to follow up, it's been represented that, for example, the Massachusetts assault weapons ban and other similar restrictions have been held to be constitutional. And while that's technically true and that the First Circuit has rendered a decision, the time period to file a petition for cert to the Supreme Court is 90 days from the rendering of that opinion. And so that appeals process has not necessarily played itself out to the extent that that matters to the council. In addition, Mr. Katz just noted the issue of transportation of firearms. There's a case currently pending before the United States Supreme Court dealing with the City of New York's transportation restrictions. So that's scheduled to be argued in October. But there are certainly compelling arguments that those restrictions are in fact not constitutional, and it's a question that's for the U.S. Supreme Court to decide.
Okay, I want to make sure all 7 of us have a shot to speak. And I'd like to give priority, if anybody wants priority, to speak in opposition.
Yes.
Mr. Perry?
I would just like to say that I don't think 7 of us should be making a decision for the entire town. I think if you want to make a stand on this, we should put the resolution out for the people to vote, and then you go to the state with all of those people that voted in favor or against this and show them this is what we want. I think that's the way to do it, rather than 7 people make a decision for the whole town of Tiverton.
You guys had your time, this is our time. Okay. I do have comments, but I prefer to, does anyone else like to hear?
Can I just,
Go ahead.
Justin, you are, I understand these resolutions have been done in other cities, and that prompted you to look into this. I also know that you are attuned to what is going on, and you've just mentioned in Providence. And just as a way of background, I can remember 4 or 5 years ago spending many afternoons, because there was a very serious effort going on in Rhode Island to seriously take away gun rights. And the people won that battle 4 or 5 years ago, but it doesn't stop. So, Justin, you've mentioned this one act that you've sort of indicated that you want to do this as a way of just sending a message. And you've mentioned this one, H5022. Are you aware of other current pending legislation that is also threatening that, like, why are these cities making these resolutions now?
Well, I don't know all the legislation that's going through. Luckily, I didn't have to read it all this year. But this is one that came on my radar that I think is particularly germane in that it shows how such an infringement could happen. And I think this is in keeping with the red flag legislation that passed last year, and which similar approaches. And as we saw with the firefighter overtime bill, sometimes legislation that you think isn't going to pass just all of a sudden does. So that's why I thought it was good to get this on an agenda quickly and make whatever statement we were intending to make.
Okay. And I've also, it's my understanding reading this that, and several people have mentioned that this really does nothing. It is just it's just a message. It has no legal effect of any kind. It's not going to change any law or action of the police or the town, anything that's going on.
I would say that's true.
Any other?
So I'll second somewhat what Councilor Perry said, which is that I don't really think, and just based on what I've anecdotally seen on Facebook and the number of emails that I've received, that there's any sort of clear opinion on this from the citizens of Tiverton, first of all. But secondly, you know, tonight we keep referring to this as a resolution, but what the resolution says is relating to declaration of Tiverton as a Second Amendment sanctuary town. And I will say that as a concept in general for anything, I don't support any kind of sanctuary town for any reason. I think we've heard a lot about the Constitution tonight, and if the Constitution is the highest, most important law in the land, the Constitution lays out the process of the United States being a country of laws and how we abide by those laws, how we change those laws, and how we challenge those laws. So and we as citizens participate in this. We elect the legislators to the legislative branch and the executive branch. We have the right to lobby them and petition them before they make laws, and we hope they represent us. And if we feel that they don't represent us, then the judicial branch is there to ensure that they don't impose on us laws that violate our constitutional rights. And that's the process. That's how it works. That's what first and foremost makes America a country of laws. And all of a sudden this concept of sanctuary cities has come along. It started with immigration enforcement. Now it's Second Amendment rights. Next month it's going to be something else. And maybe in this particular case, the statement is, well, this doesn't really mean anything. It's really just a statement. Well, I tend to agree with the town administrator. It's a little more than a statement. As soon as you start talking about discretion and direction of the police department, it's more than a statement. And if this idea of sanctuary cities and towns for various things all over the United States continues to go in the direction that it's going in, at some point, the United States isn't going to be a country of laws anymore. We're going to be a whole bunch of patchwork of tribal fiefdoms where various municipalities and counties pick which laws they're going to abide by and which laws they're not going to. So, on principle, I just can't support something that says, we're not just saying that we don't agree with this. We're making a statement that says, in some way, form, or another, we're not going to abide by a potential law. And I don't like some of the laws that come out of Providence any better than other people do. And I most certainly respect anybody's right to challenge a law that they think that they've been aggrieved by. But I don't think the solution is to start putting stakes in the sand and saying, we don't like that law, so we're not going to do it. Somebody said earlier, and this is on a personal level, what we swear to do as elected officials. And so, and as it was stated, it's not exactly correct. So I'm going to read you exactly what I said when I ended up sitting up here, even though I'm just a counselor in a little town in Rhode Island. But I raised my right hand and I said, I do solemnly swear that I will support and enforce and abide by the Constitution and laws of the United States of America and of the state of Rhode Island. That's what I said I would do, and it means something to me. And I realize there's a possibility that there may be laws passed in Providence that aren't constitutional, and they have a right to be challenged in court. But until that time, as a counselor, I took an oath, and I promised that I would do that. So that's what I have to do.
Come on.
I said something before.
So I guess I'll try to summarize, and I'll see what I can do to try to find perhaps common ground, which sometimes works, and sometimes, well, often fails miserably, but I'll try. So my view on this, and as someone that has taken, I think, 8 oaths of public office, once as a midshipman, once as a naval officer, once to the Rhode Island bar, once to the Massachusetts bar, and 4 times in Tiverton in 4 elected offices. You know, it's, I think, unfortunate that I'm hearing these sort of phrases such as stunts and divisiveness, and we've seen other towns. You can tell by the well-meaning arguments here today that there's good faith arguments on both sides, and I think it's just disappointing that we don't get distracted by that kind of a thing. And I've also heard, and I've heard others say this too, and I've seen this before, you know, the last, you know, when I've sat in roles like this where there's speeches and there's arguments, there's sort of like these strawman arguments about arguing that we're doing something that just isn't what it does. As I tried to preface this debate, this resolution does 2 things. One, it affirms discretion in the police department. I think I heard the police chief say he uses discretion every single day. So, and I think I heard a majority of speakers say that they don't think that this resolution does anything, which I disagree with on the second part. But I do think on the first part, affirming discretion, all it's doing is affirming that. So there can't possibly be a suggestion that this is interfering with the police department. And there also can't be an argument that there's some fatal flaw of ambiguity or discretion, because you just heard the police chief say he uses discretion every day. So to me, I feel like that's a relatively easy issue. I think we can hopefully all agree that I heard the school committee has done this as well as town council, has taken resolutions, perhaps non-binding, expressing support or not expressing support. So if this resolution were to pass, even if it did not involve an affirmative policy decision of this council, which I think the second part does, there's nothing different than that. And it is a complicated issue, and there's some really hot topic issues. Slavery was legal and held to be constitutional in Plessy versus Ferguson. Perhaps, I would say, the worst decision to ever happen in the history of the country, eventually overturned. So it's more complicated than to say that something is clearly constitutional or not constitutional, and that nobody has a role in that process. So these are just sort of my thoughts. And I guess the one area where I would disagree, perhaps with someone on the council even, is on the second part. I do think that the council, which by the way has to make decisions all the time on items that don't go to direct ballot voting. That's why we're elected. It happens all the time. I didn't run on the solar ordinance repeal. It was the first thing that came up in our first meeting. You know, that's why we're here, is to make some tough calls. And I do support, and perhaps I will in a future election, although that's another conversation about what gets going to ballot and what doesn't. But perhaps there should be input from others, from the whole town on a policy issue. And I do have some concerns on the slippery slope argument of where do we draw the line on how many of these issues come before the town for discussions like this, which I think are good, healthy discussions, but to be fair, they do take time and there's a lot of work to be done. I think the suggestion should be, one, try to find a connection to an impact on the town, as I believe the second part of this resolution does. So these are just my views, and with that, I'll stop talking. So the floor is open for a motion. If
Mr. President, I have 2 questions pertaining to a motion. I noticed in the Portsmouth ones earlier, part of the resolution was to send the document out. Obviously, other towns don't put that in and then send it out. Is that just assume that if we pass a resolution, we would expect that it would be sent to other town councils?
What's our practice?
But it doesn't have to be in the resolution.
Is this pretty close to the mark to the other towns' resolutions? I'm just
almost exactly.
I'm sorry, exactly?
Pretty much.
Okay.
But I did want to, in addition to what, and I'll read the resolution part, not all the with whereases, but I did want to add, and just to make sure this is okay for me to do, to be it further resolved, the affirmation of exercise of sound discretion. I wanted to end that sentence with, in accordance with department policy and the chain of command. Does that? Okay.
I'm sorry, Mike.
It's fine from a notice standpoint if that's what he's asking.
All right, so, Mr. President, I would like to move passage of a resolution relating to declaration of Tiverton as a Second Amendment sanctuary town with various whereas clauses ending, now therefore be it resolved by the Tiverton Town Council that the town of Tiverton be and hereby is declared to be a Second Amendment sanctuary town. Be it further resolved that the Tiverton Town Council affirms its support for the Tiverton Police Department to exercise sound discretion when enforcing laws impacting the rights of citizens under the Second Amendment in accordance with department policy and the chain of command. Be it further resolved that the Tiverton Town Council will not appropriate funds for capital construction of building space or purchase of storage systems to store weapons seized pursuant to the requirements set forth in any legislation if such bill is enacted by the Rhode Island General Assembly and/or for the purpose of enforcing any other law that unconstitutionally infringes upon the right of the people of the town of Tiverton to keep and bear arms. And with that resolution, I would request that the town clerk be instructed to submit a copy of this resolution to the town of Tiverton's state senators and representatives in the Rhode Island General Assembly, the Senate President, the Speaker of the House, the Governor, the Executive Director of the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, and all the cities and towns in the state of Rhode Island.
How about the citizens?
And that's a motion for passage.
We have a motion. Will there be a second?
I'll second it.
I think we've all had our say. Is there any objection to proceeding directly to a vote? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any? Was that? What? I missed the count. 3-4. Motion fails.
No.
No, 4-3, right?
No.
Motion
fails.
Motion fails.
3 in the affirmative, 4.
Okay.
No.
Who voted in the affirmative?
Nancy voted again.
Nancy, what was your vote?
Against.
Against. 3-4. Okay. Motion fails.